Call this workshop meeting into session at this time. And board members, we'll go through every item on the agenda like we normally do. And if there's something that you'd like to ask questions about or comment on, please just stop me, and then we'll move through this agenda in that manner. All right, first of all, of course, is opening. Second of all will be approval of the agenda. We're showing no recognitions, no visitors. We don't yet know about public comment. In Section 6, we're showing no administrative personnel appointments. In Section 7, we have committee and staff reports, workshop only. So 7.1 is out-of-county travel paid for the period of August 23rd through September the 6th, 2018, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer.
We're trying to, okay, you got it.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
That's okay. All right, so Section 8 will be consent agenda. 8.1 will be the approval of the consent agenda. 8.2 will be the approval of the minutes of the workshop meeting of September the 6th, 2018, minutes of the regular meeting of September the 10th, 2018, both recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.3 will be appropriation of District 4 School Board member capital outlay funds to Crestview High School for percussion instruments in the amount of $11,170, presented by Board Member Tim Bryant and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.4 will be the request to advertise a public hearing for revision of School Board Policy 04-17, extracurricular activity eligibility and participation guidelines for middle school students, presented by Mr. Andy Johnson, Director of Student Services, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
Mr.
Johnson,
Chairman?
I see you have stepped forward, sir. Please come up and give us some information here.
Yes, sir.
I just want to say before Andy gets started, our goal in the conversation we had in the last school board meeting when our parent was present, our goal was to come up with a process and a method. I would never ask a parent or anyone to come before this board and discuss a student individually, or their medical problems, or anything that had to do with that. This policy for us, thank you Mr. Johnson and thank you Jeff, is so that there is a process that parents with middle school children can go to our MSAC. So Mr. Johnson, if you would just, I'm very pleased with this. I think this is a good thing. I think it is something that's been needed.
And if I might, Mr. Chairman, before he starts, I need to give the board a clarification regarding time frames for adopting the policy. I did double check both the statute and your board policy after the last meeting. There is not anything about this particular issue pending that, in my opinion, qualifies for an emergency adoption at the board meeting on Monday night. The statute requires that you as a board find that there is an immediate danger to public health, safety, or welfare that requires emergency action, and I don't see how we can classify an athletic eligibility question as an immediate danger to public health, safety, or welfare. So therefore, the policy that's being presented to you is on the agenda for your authorization to advertise for public hearing under the normal adoption process that we would typically follow. I just wanted to go ahead and give you that answer today. So we're not proposing that you can vote on it Monday night to adopt it. Monday night's vote would simply be to allow it to be advertised, and we would follow the standard practice to adopt a rule.
All right, Mr. Johnson.
Yes, sir. There's been some discussion about implementing a waiver or an appeals process for our middle school athletes, their parents. There's currently no appeal as the policy exists right now, except for a parent to come to the school board and ask for that. Mrs. Jackson has shared that a concern is that you have a parent that would come to a public gathering with a public forum that's televised and is on the record for eternity, divulging health issues, divulging grade information, discussing whatever it might be. So this would provide a forum for a parent to come before the middle school athletic conference to request an appeal or a waiver from the current policy that exists. The policy is outlined simply, and it requires that the parent present it in writing. It requires that a vote of 8 of the 11 voting members of our middle school athletic conference be in favor of the waiver for the waiver to be approved. With the adoption of this, what it would provide for this board is that in the event a parent, unannounced or announced, came before the board with a request, simple question: have you gone before the appeals committee? Have you gone before MSAC with this appeal? And if the answer is no, then the answer can simply be, we would like, there's a process in place. We'd like for you to go through that process. If the parent says, yes, I've gone through that process, and they've denied it, then that's some immediate feedback to you that that parent was unable to obtain the consent of all of our middle school principals for what they are asking, and that would arm you with some information that you
A
otherwise
supermajority.
might not have.
A supermajority of those principals.
Well, in that regard, also note that in the proposed language, we have in here that the decision of the committee would be final. So it's not anticipated that there is another appeal beyond that. And the thinking was that when you've got that supermajority of the principals voting, that's a pretty solid answer. And so this does not provide for another level of appeal beyond the MSAC. They would deal with those issues there, and that would be final.
That's what I was going to ask. Would it end right there? They
Yes,
wouldn't come?
that's what if you adopt this policy, that's what you, yes.
We can't promise you,
Right. I mean, anybody has a right to
but
come
what
up
we
here and
can
Yes.
say is you've had 8 of your 11 principals review this, and they want these kids to participate. It's not like they don't. And but they would be a great group of people, because the child, wherever the child was at school, let's say he was at Meggs or Pryor or Bruner, his principal would be on that committee. So I just think it's a very fair way to approach this.
And real quick there, you mentioned 11 schools. We only have 9. Are we including
Well,
Fulton County
there's
with
11 voting members. I'm sorry, I cut you short. There are 10 schools, if you include Baker and Laurel Hill. There's 10 schools. And then the MSAC is also made up of our athletic director, the individual appointed by the superintendent. So
Brian Humphrey.
Brian Humphrey makes the
Okay.
11th voting member.
Okay. All right.
And that was another thing that this clearly spells out, that there's another change there in section I, where it delineates that MSAC is not only composed of the 8 middle school, bona fide middle schools,
Right.
but there's also two K-12 schools
Right.
that are included in our MSAC.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Yes,
So I just have a couple of questions, though. I remember long ago that there were eligibility waivers considered by the MSAC, the middle school principals. But in terms of this policy now, does this apply to any kind of eligibility waiver, or just in this specific case we referenced from a couple of weeks ago? Does this only apply to waivers regarding eligibility for age, or is this the process for every eligibility waiver to include grades and/or attendance?
You'll note, that's a good question. And for clarity, you'll note that the policy is not restricted or limited to only grade or only age, but it's broad-based, it's eligibility. If a parent wants a policy to be entertained for a waiver, then this is the route to go.
So then, if a parent were to ask for a waiver of their child's eligibility, basically to be allowed to participate because of failing grades, they would just do what? What would they do?
They would, as the policy states, they would provide their principal with, in writing, the current policy that doesn't allow their child to play, and they would then ask for a waiver based on whatever the circumstance was that would have caused their child, in your case, to their child, in the example that you give, not to be grade eligible. And then you'd have to have 8 of the 11 voting members to vote that because this child does not have a 2.0, we're going to let that child play.
Okay, so then this policy applies to any eligibility standard.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's in my opinion, that's a pretty big change in how we've done business in the past. Okay.
And that's a fair statement, Dr. White, because the committee correctly in the past has said if it's a eligibility standard established by school board policy, we have no authority to grant a waiver or appeal to the provision of the policy.
Right.
And so that's exactly what this was put in to do, because only the school board can allow someone to have waiver power over your policies.
Except in this case. Now we're giving the waiver.
That's what I'm saying.
status.
Only
Right.
the board can delegate that. And even the board itself, if you have a policy that doesn't have any waiver provisions in it, even the board can't waive the policy. You have to go back and amend it. But you certainly can delegate, as you'd be doing here by policy, if you choose to do that.
Question?
Yes, sir.
On that issue, we put the supermajority in there to make it more difficult and make sure that everybody, or at least a supermajority, agree. Could we not also put that after that supermajority vote is taken by the committee, that it then goes to the school board for final approval? If that would address the chairman's concerns, it could be a 2-step process. Any reason that it couldn't be done that way?
It would be your policy, sir, and certainly we would welcome your input.
And I'm directing that toward Mr. McGinnis. I don't know, he's the attorney, but procedurally or under the law, is that not allowed? Would that not be allowed?
No, this is a matter of policy. If the school board wants to then have another layer of appeal after the principals have voted, you could certainly establish that.
Okay, well,
You don't have to do that, but you
Right.
can.
Possible solution to the dilemma Chairman White is, I think, wrestling with.
Well, I will say this, part of the supermajority vote was to address that very concern.
It is.
Because these are policy eligibility standards that the board has said this is what we want and prefer. Therefore, staff discussion was that it should take more than just a simple majority of the committee to override the board policy language. So that was done to give the board a little more comfort that it's going to take a supermajority to look at one of these eligibility standards and agree that there's a hardship that can be waived.
Yep.
That's part of why that was done.
And I understand the idea behind it, but perhaps it may not be enough to make some of us happy. Let me go back to the other question about our policy had an appeal process, that it was outlined in the policy, but we did not have a process. Is that where we are now? I know that the lady that came to the meeting, last meeting, quoted that the policy had an appeal process section, but that there was no real outline about how that should take place. Is that?
May I just make an attempt? And things may have been changed because it's been a long time since I was there, but there is at least one other member in attendance in the audience that might also help me recollect this. I think the Middle School Principals Association has a policy and procedures manual. And Mr. Johnson, would you speak to that, please?
Right. Not mentioned in school board policy nor authorized by school board policy. One of the recommendations that's coming before you with this recommendation is that the Middle School Athletic Conference have the authority and be delegated with the responsibility of that manual. And so, yes, there is a manual that addresses things like the rules of play for the different sports,
Right.
Good sportsmanship,
Officials, referees.
referees and
that
things
they do.
like
Right,
that.
right, right.
Mhm. It's called the MSAC manual.
And I just can't remember in that particular manual if there were stipulations regarding how a waiver might be granted for eligibility, but I well remember that that committee would consider waivers on occasion for eligibility. But I think in this case, what is significantly different is that this policy could be a waiver for age.
It could be.
In the past, my recollection was, I don't ever remember a waiver being submitted to the middle school committee, principals committee, to consider a waiver for age because school board policy stipulated an age limit. And so that particular kind of waiver request was never made because school board policy stipulated an age limit.
That's correct.
This new policy would allow a waiver for age, if I understand it correctly.
It would allow a waiver for age if a parent was able to convince at least 8 of the 11 members that there was a hardship. And a case in point, recently, Crestview High School has a student this year who, in violation, who would not be able to play because of the current age restriction. The school, the parent, was able to present the waiver committee of the Florida High School Activities Association with substantive testimony that they have, that Niceville High School's Charlie Morello, who sits on that waiver committee, he himself was one of the voting members, and that young man is playing football now because he obtained a waiver, the school obtained a waiver
From FHSAA.
From FHSAA.
So the point is, I think then, that FHSAA, even they grant waivers for age.
Given enough background information that would support a hardship waiver being granted.
Good point.
So let me get this clear. They were able to grant a waiver to a school board policy of this district?
Our school board policy, this school board policy addresses middle school
only.
only.
That was high school.
Okay.
There's another policy that addresses
gotcha.
high school, and our policy basically says we will comply with Florida High School Activities Association.
And we cannot make that same situation apply to the middle schools? They
Well-
are not under the middle school at all, is that what you're telling me?
Essentially, this policy would parallel
Right.
the High School Activities Association.
But we cannot just be part of the high school activity association because it's a middle school and not a high school?
Correct.
Right now, we can't. There is a middle school, there is a Florida High School Activities Association middle school unit. Currently, we choose not to partner with that association, as do many other school districts. It has a playoff. It would require additional cost. You're going to send your middle schools to various
Okay.
parts of the state. So we choose, that's one reason we choose not to
Okay.
be part of it.
Thanks.
So basically, this middle school policy that we're asking for today mirrors the high school policy in that there is a committee that reviews and can make that recommendation.
That's true.
And, you know, I don't know if the board wants every one of these to come to them, because oftentimes, depending on the year, there are many. But, I mean, I have no problem with that. No problem at all.
And I appreciate the remark and the comments, and I guess, you know, I think we've heard this issue on more than one occasion about this particular issue concerning age waiver. I guess the thing that I want to say is that it is entirely appropriate, and as board members, as you all understand, and the superintendent clearly understands this, for the district, under the superintendent and her staff, to bring forward a recommendation for a new policy. I mean, in fact, I think, Mr. Attorney, you could talk about that's how the law envisions this process working. That the superintendent and her staff of experts will bring forth recommendations for changes to policy, okay? It is true that the school board, we can act, we can create policy, but that is a rather irregular event. Normally, and the law envisions this, it is the responsibility of the superintendent to bring forth policy changes. And so in this situation, the superintendent, after reviewing these couple of instances, has determined that it's in the district's interest to look at a new policy. And so, board members, that's kind of where we are with this particular item that's on the agenda that bears the superintendent's recommendation.
Can I make a comment real
Yes,
quick?
sir.
And as much as I respect my fellow school board members and all of your input there, I think what I was gathering from the parent that was here the other day was the fact that she made a request back in July, and here it was in September, finally trying to get something done. I think what I look at it is, how can we speed up that process without the red tape? And I think in this case here, you know, her son probably was never going to play this year anyway, just because of the time frame that. But I think from what I was gathering from her was that she was trying to look at a way, how can we speed that up? And by giving the principals a supermajority vote and reviewing those without necessarily having to come before the school board, I think that's, in my opinion, I think that's a plus for getting things done a lot quicker than, you know, maybe having to come before the school board. Now, they can come anytime. I mean, there's public, they can fill out a blue card and speak their piece. But, I can't speak for them, but I know if 8 out of 11 are going to say they're going to support the waiver or not support the waiver, when it comes before me, I'm going to support what the majority has already voted. So,
And to your point, Mr. Bryant, if a parent did fill out a blue card and did appear unannounced with an issue about a waiver, you would, with the adoption of this policy, be able to say, have you gone through the appeals process? If they've not, you route them through the appeals process. If they have, you can ask for, what was your answer? And if the answer is no, then you're immediately given some feedback there that they were not able to obtain a supermajority of support from middle school principals. And that's important feedback when someone's asking something of you.
And I think to address that, you're right. Her concern, one of her concerns, was the length of time it takes before something happens to get it on a board agenda, to get it to a meeting. These middle school seasons are not extremely long. They're very short in some cases, and I think that's a very good point. And I had forgotten about that piece, but you're right. That was part of it. So hopefully this will be something where they can meet, make a decision. If the mother's not happy with the decision, or the father, or whomever, then they can come to the board and express their concerns there, which I don't have a problem with. I mean, these folks are going to make good decisions.
and that was my point, is that if we give those principals or the MSAC that latitude, they still have an opportunity to come speak before us. I mean, I just think they can get a lot more resolved quicker, you know, and if that child is eligible, then get them out there playing.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And the only other question I had is, and we talked about this, is should, let's say, the eligibility, let's just take age as the one that's requested, should that waiver request for age be requested in the fall? And should it, supermajority votes yes, just like in the case an FHSA that you mentioned, Mr. Johnson, and the committee votes yes, does that age waiver now apply for the entire year for every sport, or is it season specific?
Yeah, the MSAC discussed the appeals, and they look at establishing 3 dates in their MSAC manual that they would be authorized to create.
Okay.
That would be prior to the appeals would be
A window.
30 days before, and I'll just pick a number.
Sure.
Because 30 days before the fall season begins, 30 days before the winter season begins, and 30 days before the spring season begins. I've not been part of a discussion about if that eligibility, if it's age. I don't have an answer for that. We would let the MSAC discuss it, but my thought is if we're talking about age, it would be for the current school year. If we're talking about a grade eligibility,
Sure.
we know that for our middle school sports, that those are looked at each grading period.
Right.
So,
Well, that might be a question that we'd want to resolve before we voted on it, just so that we know. That, I mean, either you tell the parent you're going to have to apply 3 times, okay, for 3 different seasons, or they apply once for an age waiver. I don't know, whatever the decision would be.
I'm sure that'd be addressed in that MSAC manual,
Okay.
at a minimum.
All right. Anything else on this item?
Are there any proposed changes you want made or anything you want adjusted?
Well,
or-
if they're suggesting any, they can give that to you now, or they could call perhaps before
Sure.
Monday. Does that work?
Yes, sir.
You're talking about us?
I
Yeah,
think that's what
board
he's
members,
asking.
yeah. I mean,
No, I like the idea that they can do a supermajority vote and move on.
And just so I understand the process, if there was a change and one member proposed it, do we change it before Monday's meeting?
well, I mean,
My point- yeah.
typically, you'd be voting if someone wants to amend what's there, we'd be looking for a consensus of the board to do something like that. But now, if you want to amend it, it would need to happen at Monday's meeting, because once we run that ad, if you make a
Right.
material
Yeah.
change, we have to start all over again.
And that's the point I would make, is if anybody wants to amend it, we're going to have to do it at the meeting where we can vote.
That's correct. I was just trying to get a heads up if there's
Yeah.
some issue.
If it looked like there was a consensus.
Well, you know, I guess, and I understand, we're looking at what, roughly 90 days now?
Once you approve the advertisement, it's a 28-day window from when the ad runs, and then, of course, we have to get a board meeting after that, so it's oftentimes 60 days.
Yes, sir. And so with that kind of time frame, this is unlikely, should it pass Monday night, to resolve any immediate issues that may have come to our
Correct.
attention. All right? So should Monday night there were to be language proposed that would push it to the next board meeting, two more weeks on top of 60 days,
I don't think you can do it, can you?
I don't even know that that's significant, frankly, but.
Well, I think in
you-
the case of the parent that was here the other day,
It's not gonna-
it wasn't going to happen anyway.
Right.
But that's why I say I think her frustration was,
Yeah.
if we could have addressed it then, now here we are.
Or a year
60
ago.
Yeah.
Or a year ago.
And that's
Exactly.
why
First brought it forward.
I wanted to give you the answer on any potential for the emergency vote, but my advice is there is no basis for the emergency vote. Therefore, this is going to be in the regular process.
Right.
Lord, I hope we don't get in charge of the NFL draft.
No kidding. Or night.
Lord, let's move on. I mean, we're both Monday
Yeah,
night. Good
I know.
Lord.
I know you feel that way. But are there any other questions or comments about this proposed policy by the superintendent? All right, then. Let's go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
All right, 8.5, invoices to be approved for payment presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.6, school donations presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
Since Ms. Thrush isn't here, I'll comment on her behalf there, but thank you to all these businesses and community leaders that have stepped up to give money to these schools here.
All right. Thank you. 8.7, payroll warrant register and accounts payable warrant register for August 2018 totaling $19,391,000 $53.64, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.8, application for impact aid under PL 81-874 for the 2018-2019 school year, naming Superintendent Mary Beth Jackson as the authorized representative for the board, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.9, factory direct agreement. Jamaire, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.10, amendment to contract Raptor Technologies, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Ms. Jackson, Dr. White, excuse me. Ms. Jackson, I see Destin's here, not Eric, and I apologize I didn't call ahead, but just in some of my visits to schools in the North Zone, can you give us an update on how Raptor is, there seems to have been some technical issues and some training issues. So can you give us an update where that's standing real quick?
Yes, sir. Thank you. As with any new system rollout, training is always the fun part. And Eric is personally going out and training schools on site. He's doing follow-up trainings at Carver Hill Training Complex and advertising those and inviting people to come out. I know in the past 2 weeks things have gotten a lot smoother out at schools versus startup, and a lot of that was training related.
Right.
So.
And that's what I try to reassure those people, is that it's a great program. We just got to get through the first.
Yes, sir. And our whole department is behind it, and we support it. And the IT help desk takes phone calls, and we walk them through those things. So we'll keep on it.
Well, thank you for coming up, and I apologize I didn't get
No
ahead
problem.
of time.
Justin,
Yes,
I
sir.
did receive an email that said within the first day or two, Raptor identified a sexual predator that was trying to get in our school. And that's what we want. We want that thing to help us, we want that technology to provide us with an additional layer of security for our kids. So I was pleased with that.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
that's a good thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That good, Mr. Brown?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
8.11, tag on bid purchase over $25,000, Musco Lighting, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.12, tag on bid purchase over $25,000, Train, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.13, exempted purchase order over $25,000, Brain Pop, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.14, renewal of exempted purchase over $25,000, Blackboard Incorporated, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.15, quarterly report of subcontractors vendors, presented by Mr. Dustin Keith, Seat Management Specialist, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.16, infrastructure funding agreement to the Workshop Innovation and Opportunity Act Memorandum of Understanding with Career Source Okaloosa Walton, presented by Mr. Jerry Sansom, Principal, Okaloosa Technical College, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.17, 2018-2019 Uniform Statewide Assessment Calendar, presented by Mr. Steve Horton, Assistant Superintendent of MIS, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.18, multi-year lease of Avaya telephone equipment, AGC Networks, presented by Mr. Steve Horton, Assistant Superintendent of MIS, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And Superintendent, with your permission,
Yes,
Mr. Horton could
Mr.
come
Horton,
forward. and
I will
Dustin
say,
maybe, and,
I will
talk
say
about it.
we have spent quite a bit of time discussing this and looking at this. I know Ms. Scallon has been a part of this and looking at the financial pieces. And I think these gentlemen have done an excellent job in their research and in trying to figure out a way to save us some money and get us a better product. I know I'm going to embarrass Mr. Horton, but he's done that a lot for us over the last 5 years. He finds a way to figure out how we can get something and it not be such a burden on the district, but provide our students with a better product. And I just want him to explain this thing to you, because he's explained it to me several times. And I just hope that I have understood it correctly, Mr. Horton.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. And Dustin, being my wingman here, will speak to a lot of the details, as I'm sure you can appreciate. What this is before you is a request to kind of complete or provide a capstone for something that's been in the progress in the district for the last few years. The board has most recently allowed us to do infrastructure work at OTC to get that campus up to speed. And we have, over the last several years, as phone systems became too expensive to repair and maintain, we have, and the board has allowed us to change out those phone systems one school at a time to what is called VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol, and families out there might know that paying for traditional phone service and long distance service is no longer a requirement in the world we live in. And so it's something that we've been working towards for the last several years. The opportunity has presented itself this summer to be able to complete the rest of the district kind of at once, and that is all the schools and all the district buildings, and move them all towards a voice over internet protocol phone system. The phones will look the same. The phones will work the same. What happens is they run through our computer lines in our schools and our classrooms, and so the hope is it's transparent to teachers as we move through this process and provide adequate training school by school. What happens is we eliminate the phone bill, the traditional phone bill that we have been paying for any number of years. And so in doing so, that frees up, in general terms, and I won't speak to all the finance, but it frees up funding to be able to pay for these, pay for this system. And the promotional piece that's going on with Avaya Networks right now allows for a significant reduction in the cost of the phones. So we're paying for all of the installation, all of the maintenance, and some of the cost of some of the phone sets. But the pricing is such, and I've provided each of you, and it was uploaded this morning. I don't want to have you digest all this at once, but what it does is just kind of gives you a 5-year look at what our current phone costs are and to whom we pay those costs, and what it might look like under this new proposal. And so I'll absolutely be available to have that discussion. As I mentioned before, we're working right now up to the minute with the leasing company to provide the leasing documents for us, and I think that our attorney's been working with them, and we believe we'll be able to provide those to you hopefully later today, and then be available for questions all the way up through Monday night.
Will you take questions?
Absolutely.
At this point through your presentation? So you said there is a cost savings, there's a promotional period?
Yes, sir. So if we were to kick this can down the road a little bit, we have been told that September 25th is the deadline for promotional promotion being offered by Avaya, the phone manufacturer. So getting this approved before the 25th of September, and our board meeting's the 24th, could provide us up to $250,000 in savings over phone costs. We would be getting all of our classroom handsets for free under this promotion, and beyond the 25th, we would not be. And so that would increase the cost.
And so, and board members, this is why I'm saying this. I think this leads to what your request is that additional information be provided to the board prior to Monday night. We don't have that information at this juncture, is that correct?
That is correct.
And that information is what?
The lease, the municipal lease and option agreement that Mr. McGinnis is working on with the attorneys, and he can speak to that some.
And so, board members, that's why what I'm trying to convey here is that it's my thought that we grant permission for this information to be added at a later time so that we can vote on this Monday night to take advantage of this $250,000 promotion. And so that's kind of what I'm saying that I'd like to do, and I guess I just wanted to see if board members had any thoughts about that, because if we miss this window, then we may be subject to an additional cost of $250,000. Is that an
It is
accurate-
correct, and Dr. White, we've asked the company, just in an abundance of caution, to send us something in writing extending that promotion
Okay, good.
to the next board meeting. In the event things didn't work
Okay.
out, we were not able to receive that from them.
All right.
The answer was kind of indirectly, then I guess it'll cost more.
Mr. McInnes, would you speak to what you're doing with
You know,
that?
what I'd like to let the board know is that they can fully discuss with you today the business terms, because what I'm working on does not affect the business terms. We are working on elements of that lease that have to do with the lease purchase piece of it.
Okay.
Strictly legal matters that do not change the business deal, but are very important to have right in that lease. So they can explain the entire thing to you today, and the document you get is not going to be any different from that regarding the business side of the
Okay.
terms. I'm working on some issues dealing with security interest, certain tax code representations, strictly legal matters that the board would in all likelihood be deferring to council about, so you can get a full outline of the business deal today.
But are you suggesting that you'll provide those to us before Monday night?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
That lease document's got to be here
Okay.
to be voted on, but I'm just reassuring you, it's not, the stuff I'm working on is
Doesn't
not
affect the
changing
deal.
the
I
material side of the business
I
transaction.
understand that.
Unless it's a deal killer.
Right, unless it kills the deal, that's correct.
Okay.
And I'll
Yes, sir.
assure you that the things we're requesting to be changed are applicable under Florida law when a Florida governmental agency does one of these transactions. It may not be the same for any other, every state has its own. And that's been one of their issues is just having somebody in Florida confirm what I'm telling them
Okay.
so that we can get some things out of that document.
And to that, this particular arrangement is a lease, 3-year lease with a $1 buyout, are the terms of it. And what you'll see in this spreadsheet is we would be making a monthly payment on this system for 36 months. There would be all of the appropriate non-appropriations clauses in the contract if the board did not have the funds to appropriate in year 2 and beyond.
And that's what I'm
And he's working on those. So it would be, it'd be a monthly payment that would, in essence, replace the monthly phone bill we currently pay to CenturyLink. And board members may remember that E-Rate is a federal program that helps to subsidize phone and internet costs. Over the years, E-Rate has provided a discount on telephone services and phone bills, and so the district was not always paying the full cost of the phone bill. That has been eliminated over time to the point now that we are paying the full phone bill to CenturyLink. And so that is another reason why we're really wanting to move in this area, because we no longer get the savings on phone bills that we used to get through the federal E-Rate financial program. What you'll see here, and again, is a 5-year piece that would show monthly payments for 3 years and then those stop. And beyond that, we have maintenance agreements that we would put in place that then would in net result in the potential for significant savings. And one thing you will see is we run our voice over internet phones through what are called SIP trunks. And we currently have 5 schools, working on a 6th right now, that have this system in place. And we do pay a monthly cost for the SIP trunks, because it's almost like when I'm at home, I pay for my modem or my router. And so as we add these systems to all the schools, we will increase the number of SIP trunks that we use. That cost is also included in this analysis. And in that included, you will also see that there's, we expect to see significant savings in year 4, 5, and beyond. Now, the other question that was asked was, an individual school, what happens when a phone breaks? And so at this time, that's handled at the school level in terms of a repair or a purchase of a new phone. That would not change under this agreement. We would expect, since we have new phones across the district, that there would be less of those repair needs as there are now. And Dustin shares with me, when some of the older systems, Carver Hill and those sorts of things, there are connections and things that are 40, 50 years old. So it'll be good to get these all moved over to voice over internet.
That was going to be my comment, is that I'm just excited to see that we're going to be on the same system. And, kind of like what you're doing with the security system, trying to get us all on the same page there. So.
Well, the thing that has made some of the administrative assistants so excited is that when I told them that once this is implemented, it's fully integrated throughout the district. You could pick up your phone and with a 5-digit extension reach anybody in the district and not have to go out, dial in, dial 9, do all these other things. And so there's a lot to involve, but to think what Dr. White stated, that it's very important that the training piece and the setup piece be done well in schools, because some of this will be happening while school is in session. So we're going to be very careful and meticulous about how we do that and transition folks over. And we've got the experience with this company for the past 5 schools that we've done this with, that the model has worked very well in terms of getting those up and running.
Mr. Horton, would you explain to the board what you told me about, there's a lot of angst from folks when you get a new phone system. People don't like new. And I understood from you that the old phone will be sitting right there next to the new phone. So if there are any issues, that they won't have to get so excited.
Yes, ma'am. All that transition will take place, over night. So the plan would be to put those phones on the desks and let them be there but not working, and then switch over kind of at the point in time where it's appropriate to do so. And we would ask that the company work within a school. Of course, Dustin will be lead on this from our perspective, but work within a school to make sure everybody is comfortable and satisfied with the service. You will see on this spreadsheet a couple of the possibility that we would still have CenturyLink for a small piece, and we're still looking at that. There could be some fax lines or some other things that we may still keep with those folks. That's why we put that in there for CenturyLink still.
Well, the bottom line when we get all through is, I'm assuming, because it's on the agenda, is Ms. Scallion has reviewed this very closely, and I'm assuming, Rita, that you've looked at it from the financial standpoint and you feel comfortable with the deal. In other words, I'm assuming, being it's here, you've looked at it very closely and feel like that you feel comfortable with it, correct? Okay.
And the only other thing, I'll say one more thing that Ms. Scallon would want me to say is that this agreement will be structured in such a way that the first payment won't be for 90 days from the date of board approval. And so the intention of that is so that we can get this system in place in schools and switched over, and not have to make, it's not double payments, but we don't want to be paying a CenturyLink bill and a payment on the lease at the same time, because that speaks to funds available. So there's the 90-day piece, and the other thing that will happen is once we do the first 3 or 4 schools, we can port them over to the new system while we go on to the next 3 schools. And at that instant in time, the CenturyLink bill will start to decrease. So we should see over those 90 days a decrease in the monthly CenturyLink bill as we work these schools over one at a time.
What is projected timeline to do it, get it started, and get it finished? What is your projected timeline?
Yes, sir, Mr. Walker. Projected timeline is 90 days from the time of approval. And after approval takes place, we'll be meeting with their project manager to set a schedule. And then I can bring that back to the board once we have the schedule set.
So if we approve it, when we say approval, if we approve it at the next board meeting,
yes, sir.
you were saying that 90 days from today, then we'll have the system up and going.
Yes, sir.
And let's make sure we understand the scope of that question. That means we're going to replace every handset in the school district. Is that right?
Minus the ones that are currently on the VoIP system already.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Phones.
It's a lot.
A lot of people.
I got questions.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is this the only company that is available to do this for us?
This is a company we standardized on 5 years ago, Mr. Destin, and we've had nothing but good experience with them. So we wanted to continue in the standardization of sticking with the same voice over IP phone company.
And they've done 5 schools of 30?
We've actually done 7 schools right now, and we have some that are partially completed, such as OTC campus is partially completed pending the retrofit. And even here at this campus, at Central Admin, it's partially completed here.
Okay, so, but they're not the only company that provides these services, but they're the ones we've used to do 7 or 8 or how
Yes,
many
sir.
schools in the system?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Destin, I might add, it's my understanding that this company and this product is on a state bid list, so it's already been competitively selected. So
Vetted.
we do have the
Yep.
purchasing has confirmed all that we're in line with the competitive selection to, in essence, tag on to that bid.
Okay, and another question, we have experienced voice over in our businesses to do our credit cards and a number of other things. The problem we've run into is we had to keep the CenturyLink backup because of, breaks in the service. Have we thought about that as far as the safety in the phone service? I mean, simply on a number of occasions when the internet didn't work or when it was buffering, didn't work, and if we had not had the backup on CenturyLink, we'd be out of business.
Yes, sir. I can speak to that. Mr. Horton did allude to the idea of keeping CenturyLink lines
I
at
heard that. I just
locations.
didn't hear the
And
details.
so the details of that are that we're going to keep them potentially for 911 services to ensure that we have a backup for 911 services, and also potentially for fax lines. There's the way faxes come in through the VoIP IP system, they're a little bit different, and there may be some information that comes in that we'd like it to come through the traditional.
And so what do they charge for that CenturyLink? Is that,
There's a state contract we have to go through for that through Department of Management Services,
Yep.
and they have a set price that they give us per line.
and it is substantially cheaper, I take it?
It's substantially cheaper than if I were to walk into the CenturyLink store.
Is
Yes, sir.
that is that cost factored into our comparisons?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
thanks.
Board members, superintendent?
No, sir.
All right, so let me just say this, I'm sensing that we're on go with what I'm proposing, that if we'll add these legal agreements so that Monday night we can take action, and then that way take advantage of the discount, if you will, that's being provided. I'm not hearing any
Yes, sir,
objection.
I'm in agreement.
I don't have any problem, of course,
Okay.
getting information 10 minutes before the meeting,
I know,
but,
I agree.
and then I have the option to vote no.
That's
So,
right.
so I don't have a problem with it.
Well, you might have company.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I think honestly, I mean, just listening to them, they could go on, of course, for a lot more detail, but I appreciate the work that you put
Yeah.
into it and the research that you've done, so getting that information, I agree, 10 minutes is a little quick, but I think y'all have done your homework, and
Well, we're depending on our lawyer.
That's right. And Dr. White, if it's appropriate right now, or you may call me back up, but there's a task order further down the agenda
Okay.
that is associated with this program for implementation management on
Okay.
the part of Teleforce.
All
And
right,
it's
what-
also
what-
included in this cost
Would
analysis.
you like to speak to that now, then, since you're up?
I'll let Dustin speak to the details of it,
Okay,
but
all right.
sorry about that.
All right, go ahead.
No problem. All right. So with prior phone installations, we've had Teleforce CACI completely manage the rollout of those phone systems, and we're going to be doing the same here. We've asked them to do the exact same services that they provided in the past, but simply we're going to be purchasing through a different avenue the actual equipment.
Okay.
So,
And you've already got that worked out with them, and they're good with that?
yes, sir.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you, man. All right, so, moving on. 8.19, license agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County and NTLB Corporation to provide curriculum to students in the Okaloosa County Career Technical Education Program for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Ms. April Branscombe, CTE Program Director, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.20, school-to-work contracts between the School Board of Okaloosa County and the school-to-work program providers to provide career experience opportunities to eligible students at Silver Sands School, presented by Ms. Melody Summer, Program Director, Exceptional Student Education, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
I would like to comment. Ms. Summer is here, I see. Thank you again for your hard work in getting these opportunities for these students to get out into the workforce. Of course, I see it up in Crestview with Richburg, so this is a great opportunity for these kids to get hands-on experience in a real work environment. So thank you very much for your hard work on that.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. All right, Superintendent's Human Resources Recommendations, 9.1. Employees on administrative leave, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction. That's an information item. 9.2, Deferred Retirement Option Program drop, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction. Information item. 9.3, Cleared certification requirements and issuance of contracts for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Ms. Karen Peak, Program Director of Professional Services, and recommended by the Superintendent. 9.4, Out-of-Field Report for 2018-2019 school year, presented by Ms. Karen Peak, Program Director of Professional Services, and recommended by the Superintendent. 9.5, Personnel Recommendations, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent. 9.6, Employment Separations, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.7, Employee Transfers, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent. 9.8, Reinstatement, Reimbursement of Sick Leave due to Line of Duty Illness, Injury, Medical Examination, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent. 9.9, Leave Without Pay, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent. Section 10, Discussion Agenda. There are none at this time. Section 11, Construction Program Owners, Representatives, Business. Mr. Walker, do you have anything, sir?
No, nothing.
Okay. Section 12, Information Technology Seat Management, and Mr. Horton and Mr. Keith spoke to this already. 12.1, CACI Task Order number 2-110 for district-wide Avaya Unified Communication System Upgrade, presented by Mr. Dustin Keith, Specialist Seat Management, and recommended by the Superintendent. All right, Mr. Attorney, any business, sir?
No report today.
All right, Superintendent, your business, ma'am.
The only thing that I would say is I'm taking the opportunity to be in schools and spend quality time. And that doesn't mean a 15-minute visit just to say my foot touched the campus. It means a 2.5, 3-hour visit, visiting rooms, talking to principals. And I was at Wright Elementary yesterday morning for a long time. Visited their EBD program there. And Melody, I thanked you for some of the resources that you have provided. I think they're headed in the right direction there as far as getting the resources and the things that they need for that school. I also saw their single gender classes. I saw and listened to the teachers, and I haven't seen that kind of excitement, I think, in some of our elementary teachers in a long, long time. And one of the most exciting things to me is to walk into a room, and I took pictures yesterday, Mr. Walker, to show you guys our professional development in this district. We could sell it. We could sell it.
You could copyright.
We certainly could. And you go into these classrooms and you have first graders at Wright Elementary. The teacher said these are their words for this week. Their words were independent, timid, responsibility, and those little first graders were telling me a story using those words. And I came back and spoke to Mr. Chambers. I said, that makes me so proud of these students. And one other, I was in a little third grade class, and they were discussing what is evidence-based text. And I'm like, I asked this little boy, I said, what is evidence-based text? He said, well, let me get my homework. So he pulled his homework out, and he said to me, you see this right here? This is how I know this statement up here is right, because we have evidence from the text. And it says that Johnny was angry because, and he said, after the because, you underline that because that's evidence. I said, oh, okay then. But our professional development and the people that do our professional development, I'm constantly impressed. And that's why our kids do well, folks. That's why they do well. And you allow us to put that money there. You help us buy these resources that these students need. And I just invite you. I mean, and that little school has 80% free and reduced lunch. They have the largest ELL population in our district. I'm just constantly amazed at what our staff, our teachers, are able to do with not a whole lot. Now, most of the stuff in their room, I have to admit, was homemade by them. But that's how resourceful they are. Marcus and his staff teach them, they go back and implement. That's exciting to me. And I would love for you to go with me one day. I invite any of you to go with me one day on some of these visits, and I want to show you just exactly what's happening in our schools. You would be very proud. You really would. That's it.
All right, thank you, Ms. Jackson. All right, board members' announcements. First of all, 15.1, designation of school board members to serve as legislative liaison and alternate on the Florida School Boards Association Legislative Committee. Mr. Bryant.
I will volunteer.
Oh, you're so good.
Happily to continue that role.
So I don't have to ask.
No, sir.
Okay, good, good.
Good deal.
Yeah, I see nods of agreement.
But I would love Mr. Destin to be the backup if he's.
Well, I could be the backup because I have faith that you won't miss.
Well, but I will say Mr. Destin too. The reason why I would suggest Mr. Destin is because he does have with his business, he does do a lot of work in Tallahassee, so he does have inside connections too. So, but you're right, I will do my best to be there on behalf of the board. So,
thank you, Mr. Bryant. All right, so board members' announcements. Mr. Bryant, I'll start with you, sir.
Okay. Well, just to follow up on Ms. Jackson, you know, I have been in the schools and I see exactly what you're talking about. Just one in particular event that I noticed the other day, I was right across the street over at Edge, and I just have to tell you that going into any of the schools, every school has something exciting going on, and I've always encouraged people, go visit your local school and see what's going on for yourself. Don't just take it from me or my fellow board members or superintendent. Just go in and take a look. But I have to commend Dr. Dawson. She really has a personal touch with her students. And I happened to get there when they were doing their new morning show, and it was on a Friday, so they had all their leaders, student leaders come up that were nominated by their teachers, and Tigerific kids. And it was just really neat to see them all come up, and they were all waiting in line, and I had the chance to talk to them and shake their hands and all. And but just to see the personal touch that Dr. Dawson puts with those children, and that's just, you know, Dr. Dawson is just one example of the many good things that are going on and what our teachers and staff do. I would also like to comment, you know, getting into the schools, we get letters from our constituents, and one of the issues that we've had is at Walker with the pickup. And I did want to say to Ms. Jackson and her staff, thank you very much for trying to work together with the city and the county. Obviously, we're going to have to keep doing our part to get that resolved. But I just want to say thank you for, you know, taking the time to get that addressed. And then finally, just real quick, a couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go to the Department of Juvenile Justice School, and Ms. Schroeder met me up there with Mr. Sansom, and I will tell you that, you know, people don't realize that we are giving those children, or those, you know, children an opportunity to redeem themselves with education, and they have a wonderful CTE program there where they're doing woodwork, they're teaching them skills. We got a certified carpenter in there now who's teaching them from the Builders Association. So this is a great opportunity for those students. And if we just make a difference with one of those students and get them off the streets and out of trouble, then we've been successful there. And I think we got the programs there to help them be successful. Of course, it's up to the kids to make those choices, but I think we're giving them all. So if you ever get a chance to go visit the Department of Juvenile Justice, just contact Terry and Mr. Sansom, and they'll take you out there and give you a great tour of it. So a lot of great things going on out there.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bryant. Mr. Destin?
I don't think I have anything this morning, Chairman.
All right, Mr. Walker?
Nothing other than Jan would I'd like for you to introduce our new addition to the board and the superintendent staff. She, I know with your expert training and everything, I think she's gonna be very welcome. Would you mind introducing to the staff and everything?
Not at all. This is Mary McGowan, just joining our office, and we'll be in contact with you or you with her. She'll be working on minutes and contracts and helping in every asset that we have.
That's all I have, Mr.
All right, thank you, Mr. Walker. Welcome aboard, Ms. Mary. All right, so there is one other item on the agenda, board members, is 17.1, a public hearing for the adoption of a new school board policy 06-40, personnel investigations, presented by Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the superintendent. Any other business that we need to cover before we adjourn this workshop? Good? Meeting is adjourned.
Take it easy.
Yeah, we'll see you right here.